So welcome to the Culture Think Tank, where we discuss the trends and analytics of culture facing us today. Our goal is to help provide insights and best practices organizations and leaders can use to strengthen their cultures during today's new normal. I'm Will Lindstrom. Today is our weekly Roundup, where we have a panel of experts who are going to review the trends and the insights from our weekly analytics poll. Our poll this week focused on trying to unearth the analytics of the new normal, which we experienced today with a little bit of the technical difficulties. Joining us today are Rob Nielsen, CEO of All American Leadership out of Irvine, California; Cynthia Kyriazis, the author of the Amazon bestseller Get Organized, Get Focused, and Get Moving, and CEO of Productivity Partners out of Kansas City; and Delise Crimmins, CEO of Design Learning out of San Antonio, Texas. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Morning.
All right. We have everybody gathered today. So what's the format? The format of today, or the weekly roundup, is that we're going to just have an open dialogue and discuss the results of everything that came back that we saw from the poll that came out this week. This week's poll really tried to understand how people are feeling. We asked people, in a word, describe how you're feeling. In a word, describe how your organization or how you think your organization is feeling. And the idea is to begin to unearth what are the feelings, what are the insights, and really what are the analytics that are highlighting and pushing the new normal today. So I'm just going to open up to our panel right now and see who would like to start by giving us their thoughts on the results of the implication of our organizations and leaders. And what you should be seeing on the screen now is our summary of our dashboards. You can review all of the charts here. They're all online, but we're going to start by looking at the first one, which is the first word cloud, which is from a life perspective, how are you feeling in one word? And if you advance to the next slide, we're going to blow this up so that you can see it in a little bit more detail, and then we'll open up to the panel to discuss.
Will, from the clients that I've talked to over the last 2 weeks, those words they are exactly what I'm hearing, and the uncertainty and the anxious feelings that our leaders are having are matched by what the employees are having. And this is new to people. These are the people with whom I work are talented executives who are used to working with a workforce that knows what they're doing, that is excited and energetic, and suddenly the leader feels anxious and uncertain, and he or she looks at the team and they're anxious and uncertain. So it's a completely new context around which to lead your people. So those words they match what I'm seeing with my clients as well.
Absolutely. Over the last 2 weeks, we've done a similar survey. One of my colleagues, Dr. Kevin Basic, and myself on social media, and you could literally overlay this word cloud to the word cloud that we created. Uncertainty and anxious, overwhelmed are right there, all clumped together. And it's this unprecedented, ubiquitous experience, human experience, that is global in context.
And I would ditto what Delise and Rob have said, exactly those words. Anxious and overwhelmed, I hear a lot. Uncertain from leaders for sure, but the anxious and overwhelmed is present for sure for managers and staff.
Based upon the audience was primarily executives and organizational leaders. So what do you think are the causes that are driving the sense of anxiety and uncertainty from a leadership or an organizational executive perspective?
How do we supervise somebody we don't see every day? It's that, how do I make sure that things are happening that need to happen in a remote setting?
Yeah, and I agree with that, Cynthia. And one of the things that I've counseled with some of the executives, a lot of times they're anxious about, are things going to get done? So there's a control phenomenon to that. Like, how can I control a workforce that I'm not overseeing? Equally frightening for me, and I think leaders need to be aware of it, is our top performers. I believe that future behavior is best predicted by past behavior, right? So those top performers that do well in your organization, when you send them home, they're going to work really, really hard and maybe not even know when to stop. And then they become a burnout risk, they become a retention risk. So it's not just about controlling those people. Are they doing everything that we want them to do? But are we helping those that really overachieve to realize that in the 24-hour day, they're going to have to set some boundaries and we might have to help them.
Yeah, and I would even take a step back and say, you know, I liken this to driving through a driving rainstorm and your windshield wipers are on full blast and you still can't see what's ahead of you. And it's that kind of sense of uncertainty and a little bit of panic that people are feeling. And I feel like if we don't take time to acknowledge that both in ourselves and with our people, we can't move forward to that next step of, okay, what are those tactical things, those transactional things that we can do in our business to regain some semblance of performance without having that empathy and that connection to, hey, we're all in this together and nobody's getting left behind, and we're all feeling the same thing.
Yeah, Rob, what that windshield wiper analogy reminds me of, and I'm sure you guys experience it with your clients as well, the place where they don't like to be the most is where the answers to the questions aren't available. So that's what makes me feel nervous. Is it's not that I can't answer you, the answers aren't available. So I don't even know what to tell you because the information isn't there yet. So that's what I think causes a lot of the anxiety and uncertainty.
On the other hand, though, also the uncertain, anxious, anxiety, overwhelmed, all of those are what the leaders are experiencing. If you want to gain some trust, some transparency needs to be shared with those employees that, hey, you know what, I'm going through the same thing. And I'll have answers for you eventually, but right now we're all in this boat together. And I'll share that with you, you know, as we move forward. Some acknowledgement of the fact that they're not alone and it's not, you know, segmented to just staff and managers. Leaders are human and they don't have all the answers all the time. So to speak to what you always speak to, Delise, which is the issue of trust, a lot of trust is built when you are that transparent and that open.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I think these leaders are looking around their home too, Will, and they see, I've got kids here, now I'm suddenly a tutor, or at least a proctor or a teacher, depending on how old my child might be. So my child has questions that I can't answer, my employees have questions that I can't answer. So I think to Cynthia's point, to validate the emotions that people are feeling right now and say, it's okay if you're feeling uncertain or anxious or overwhelmed. You kind of should be, at least at some point, and we'll get to the other side of it, but at least to acknowledge those emotions, I think is helpful to create transparency on a team.
And to improve connection, sorry.
Oh, no, that's all right. Yeah, so, and you know, that trust thing is so important, and what we've seen through our research is trust is not nearly so high in organizations across the United States as many leaders think it is within their organizations. And now trust takes on not only a whole new importance, but I think the way trust is going to be established or sustained is going to be completely different, at least in the short term. And there's a lot of different models on what builds trust. You know, whether it's psychological safety, or we like to call it the 3 C's, whether it's character, caring, and competence. You know, having an adequate level of competence might get you through in the old normal, but right now, as we bridge this transition, I think that you have to go back to the caring part of trust. Do you have concern for my well-being?
I agree. Rob, I'm a big fan of Patrick Lencioni in his body of work, and in his 5 dysfunctions of a team. One of the ways that he talks about building trust is through lack of fear. And in our new model, lack of fear isn't an option. I mean, there's fear. So how do we establish trust in the face of fear is kind of one of our new normal questions. Is I'm going to have to be a little bit fearful and still be willing to trade in trust, which is it's just a new equation for all of us.
Absolutely. And you look at the Google's project from a couple of years ago, the Aristotle project, when they went back and they evaluated all of their most performing operating units, and they're like, okay, what are the criteria for a successful operating unit? And number 1 was psychological safety. And I think that psychological safety in the old normal was different than what psychological safety is in this moment. Because I think that psychological safety in this moment actually encompasses a little bit of the physical safety as well.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good segue into the next question that we asked, because this first question was really oriented around how leaders think. So the second question we asked was really, what, as a leader's perspective, what do you think your employees or your workforce are feeling? So if you go to the next, we'll blow up the next word cloud here, and you can see a lot of similarities, but you start to see also some differences. And I think what this is starting to highlight is how executives are feeling. They perceive their employees feeling the same way. And I think understanding those starts to build that connection. And I think that's kind of the word that I keep hearing, is that connecting is what's really going to start to lead to the new normal, which gets us to ultimately performing. But right now we're kind of going through the storming, forming, norming stages of the life cycle. So as you look at these, do you have any highlights or thoughts that you would like to consider from how executives are perceiving what their employees are feeling?
It's almost like the identical word cloud to what the leaders were feeling. And there's is there a bias here that leaders have? And what we've seen is that there always is a bias. Leaders can't necessarily put themselves in their employees' shoes unless they're in constant dialogue to understand, measure, and appreciate where they're at. But to a certain extent, you can never rise above being a human being, and we're all in that same condition right now.
Yeah, Rob, one of the things that I see when we poll our leaders versus our employees, there's more dissonance, a disparity between what leaders are feeling and what they believe their employees are feeling. I'm heartened by the fact that there's a match here, where if I feel anxious and scared, I'm imagining that my employees are feeling anxious and scared. To me, that shows that there's some empathy, and that leaders can, if they can see that, they can speak to it. And we had spoken, the four of us had spoken yesterday about that concept of connectedness, and all of us wanted to get to performance really quickly, which is my bent. I want us to get to performance as quickly as we can. And Cynthia, you talked a lot about how connectedness precedes performance. And I think if our leaders see the same issues in their employees, that creates a roadway for some connectedness, correct?
Sure. If the leader can see the similarities and acknowledge the similarities and then ask what else, because on this particular word cloud, what I see in larger font is uncertain and concerned. Yeah, and the stress and the worry is larger. So if leaders can acknowledge that with their employees, not only in this environment, but in others as well. But right now, it's important to acknowledge it by showing, as you said, empathy, and secondly, compassion, which means needing to be open to the connection, which could be a different approach and even an uncomfortable approach because it's new. But that's how true connection happens, not in this type of environment where people have those words coming out of their mouths and out of their heads. That has to happen, especially during now. You especially approach the emotional side first, and then at some point we can talk about performance and what that looks like. But skipping this point right here of acknowledging these word clouds and skipping that step is going to take, as I said yesterday, whatever emotional chaos is going on right now is going to carry forward into whatever the next stage is that the leaders lead to.
Well, in my line of work, Cynthia, I'm a behaviorist. It's what we focus on, behaviors and culture. So our definition of a culture is the collection of behaviors of a group of people within an organization. So if I look at the behaviors, the question that I'm stuck with is, do I know as a leader what connectedness, what behaviors would demonstrate connectedness in this new context? I knew how to create connectedness when we were all in the office together. But now in this new context, what are the behaviors that I'm supposed to be exhibiting that are going to create that connectedness? And I think that's new for all of us.
And I think, and I'm sure Rob can speak to this also, is it's about asking more questions than assuming what you know, what you think you know. It's really asking about how are you doing? What's happening with your family? How do you find how do you find the flow of work going? It's reaching out and asking the questions so that the employee can share with you, so there can be a connectedness, and asking those questions without judgment, just honestly and respectfully wanting to know. Because if the leader asks the questions, how are you doing? Tell me what's going on. how have you
Right.
managed this? If those questions don't seem sincere, then don't ask them. It needs to be respectful, and it needs to be with a true sense of compassion and empathy.
Yeah,
Because
I heard a quote recently that just sticks in my mind, and the person said, "Empathy is the essence of our humanity," and that empathy is what raises above effective listening. It goes so far beyond the words. It has to go to the emotions that the person's experiencing behind those words. And for leaders, and I don't care if it's a SEAL team leader that we work with, or military commanders, fire chiefs, CEOs, it's when those questions are asked with genuine curiosity and genuine caring that connectedness starts to happen. And had an old Marine colonel once say, leadership's easy. You just have to recognize that your actions are either pulling people together or they're pushing people apart. And there's nothing that accelerates that bonding between people than, in our opinion, empathy.
And let me ask, this is not designed to be provocative, but it's a question that I'm struggling with my clients and even my friends, to be quite honest. And I agree with the empathy. And in this world of overwhelm that we're in right now, my fear is in the next 21 days or so, we're going to be shown some images that I don't know that everyone's prepared to see. I don't know that anyone's prepared to see. So our need to be empathetic, I also think, means sometimes tuning out some of the noise, some of the imagery that can really affect our mental health, and focus on how can I focus on my team. Not looking doesn't necessarily mean not caring. So I can care and pray and do whatever I need to do, but that onslaught of imagery that I believe we're going to be exposed to, and I think we want to be empathetic to what's happening, but I think it can really take its toll on us if we're not careful.
That's a great point you bring up, Delise. I hear this a lot with first responders we work with, because they're on the front lines. They're seeing, they see horrific things every single day. And how do you balance that authentic empathy with being able to go in and see something that just is absolutely horrifying to see, and be able to disassociate?
Right.
And I think the key there is to be able to consciously disassociate in the moment. But what you can't do is just say, okay, that's behind me now and I can ignore it. You have to go back at some point and process the emotions that you normally would have felt and experienced when you saw that terrible thing. So I think as leaders, there are going to be those moments when we have to be dispassionate and we have to disassociate. We have to go back for our own mental health and then process what we saw so that it doesn't pop itself up somewhere else in an unhealthy way.
I think that's actually a really important point, because I think, how do we address this? And I think if we look at the third set of graphs, or the third set of word clouds, what we really looked at is what happens if we combined everything together. So if we blow this up and take a look at it in more detail, what you're going to see is a lot of similarities. You can see anxious and uncertainty becoming more and more important. And from what we've been hearing from interviews with other CEOs and podcasts that we've been doing, is this need to connect is important, need to communicate is important, but also the need for feedback. We're hearing that more and more, that from organizations, and like Ann Rose, who we spoke with, who sits on a number of boards, she's saying the boards are now stepping in, saying, okay, you know what, we need to step in and communicate, but we also have to be able to listen to feedback. And I think just the tenet of what you guys are talking about is leading us up to a question of, we're going to have these imagery, we're going to have these challenges, we're going to have, this, I think, kind of a heightening sense of uncertainty. And I think where the question that I'm kind of coming to and get feedback on is, how do leaders connect, and how important is that connection and the feedback to be able to navigate that uncertainty and to be able to process, to your point, Rob, process what's going on and get back to a form of community within the organization and within the workforce?
Yeah, I think it's hugely important. Feedback is one of the key components for job satisfaction and always has been. So we don't even think in today's world about, is my job satisfying? But at the end of the day, what we want to get to is this quote unquote new normal. And if it's a new normal, then it needs to be normal. So we have to create some behaviors that allow people to feel like they're in a stable, predictable environment where they can normalize to that and to start to perform and be connected and feel like they're the best that they can be. So I think feedback is a huge component of that.
I'd agree.
I would agree with that, but I kind of want to go back to what you said earlier, Delise, about this level of perhaps exhaustion, or this how do we prepare to view something that is stressful for us, but we still need to communicate it. When I look at this cloud, this word cloud, it says mentally exhausted. If a leader is mentally exhausted and has not put the, let's just say for the sake of argument, put the plug on watching CNN, or stopped watching the nightly news after 30 minutes, they can get mentally exhausted. When they're mentally exhausted and their staff is mentally exhausted, who's leading? So if anything else, it's similar to when you're on a plane and there's an emergency and the mask drops down. The first thing that they tell you is the parent needs to put the mask on first in order to help the child. Because if the parent faints as a result of this, the child won't be helped. And it's something similar, and I'm not trying to say we're a child-parent relationship, but if the leader is mentally exhausted because they were unable to put some boundaries around something to get them, to enable them to step back and reflect about what happened, so that their conversation can be calm in the discussion around the empathy, demonstrating empathy with the staff, and being able to mentally, as Rob said, the leader has already had to go back and mentally process, and now they can move forward to help because they're in a plane where they've already processed that vision. I don't know if I'm making sense at this point.
I think it's a great point, Cynthia. And the thing is, behaviors within organizations are highly, highly contagious, and none more so. And I'm picking the word deliberately here and not just gratuitously. But in this moment in time, people are looking to the leader, and how the leader shows up, it's going to reflect and ripple down all the way through the organization. So if I need to take that step back. I need to find, as one of my colleagues says, find that battle cry, find that mantra that will help me get recentered, and take deep breaths before I go back out and present myself to my people. I can't hide. I can't be panicked. And it's good. It's going to make all the difference between whether we are connecting or disconnecting, as I'm looking at these words.
I like that, Robin. I agree that anxiety and uncertainty are certainly contagious, but if you look at this word cloud, and they're smaller words to be fair, but I also see calm, good, steady, great, grateful, lucky. Those are contagious too. So I think if we can find a way to demonstrate a little of that, still being transparent and being honest and open, but there's still opportunities for people who are working, that they're grateful that they're still working. Not everyone is. If we can create some sense of calm. We interviewed Jim Urban this week, who owns a wealth firm in Austin, Texas, Urban Associates, and he was a great demonstration of they're doing great. My team is great. He represented that true understanding and passion and for his people, and they're right there with him. So I think if we can do that, we can show a little bit of this calmness and steadiness amid the storm. I think it's as contagious as anything else.
So that brings up a good point. So what we did is to try to get deeper into the analytics. Is, the word clouds are really insightful. They give us a nice little sense. But as we start to get deeper, what we ended up doing, if we go to the next set of graphs here, we started to look at, as you guys were talking about, the connecting versus distancing index, and almost to start to think about how do we start to think about connecting versus distancing, and how do we start to stimulate connecting? How do we start to build that momentum, what are the things that we can do to start putting more trend and see more trend on the connecting type of words. I feel good, I feel safe, I feel at least some sense of motivation. I feel at least like my manager, my boss has my back, whatever it may be. But I'm starting to think, as we've looked at this data, and again, this is all brand new. We just got it this week, and we're just trying to make sense of it. But I start to think that there's a way, and if we go to the next one, you can see a little bit of a more of a blow up. You can start to see, how can we use this information, and how do you think executives can use this information to begin to take steps and actions? Because I think this information does begin to provide useful insights that doesn't necessarily give you control, but starts at least allowing you to measure and control what you're doing in a way.
Rob, you're the analytics guy, but I think it's important that we do, to the extent that we can, even if it's a conversational poll or if it's an actual poll, but that we do poll our employees, find out the second slide that you showed, the second word cloud, is how leaders believe their employees are feeling. It's really helpful if we actually know how our employees are feeling, and then we can implement some behaviors to mitigate those disconnecting feelings and enhance the connecting feelings. But we've got to know how they're feeling to begin that process.
Oh my goodness, absolutely, absolutely. I'm seeing a number of leaders, whether it's fire chiefs, CEOs, that are doing this, and this format, whether it's a GoToWebinar, Zoom, whatever it is, people are checking in every day, and you're seeing some incredibly powerful dialogues that are starting to take place within teams, within organizations, and they all start with, what are you feeling today? And people are feeling heard because they're asking it with genuine care and curiosity. But then they're following it up. And you touched on this earlier, I think, Delise, where it's, we do have to get back to this place of performance. And after you've asked how people are feeling or what they're feeling, then we can get into the next part of the dialogue where, okay, what do you need from me right now? And conversely, what do I need from you right now to help all of us? And then based on that, what is most important right now? And they're using a format like that to create a plan. And we talked about this yesterday. Hope is not a strategy, but hope with a plan can be really powerful. And by asking that question, what do you need from me? What do I need from you to move forward? And then let's prioritize for today. And another thing that powerful conversation I heard recently, and it's about the Stockdale paradox. Admiral Stockdale, the longest, highest ranking prisoner of war during the Vietnam conflict. And he survived when so many others didn't. And it was, he had a steadfast belief that he would survive, that they would get out of there. But also, he never looked too far ahead. If we look and say, oh my gosh, this thing's going to be over by Easter, or it's going to be over in 30 days, it may or may not be. But what I can control is what we're going to do to get through today or get through this week. And put some of those pieces together.
So how important do you think, on that note, when you're talking about obviously weekly and or daily kind of feedback, but how important is it, or where do you see the understanding or the balance be understanding where people are feeling and then the connection to what people need? Is that as equally important? What are you feeling and what do you need, and how are you seeing those two correlate?
Well, for me, and then I'll be quiet for a moment. For me, I see, as we start to look at what it is that people need and how we're prioritizing and the actual things that we're doing, the levers that we're pulling, I see tremendous power there, because we can start to say, when we start our morning meeting on Zoom with a gratitude exercise, Bill Campbell, the $1 trillion coach, one of the things that he always did was he would never start a meeting without everybody around the table saying, here's what I'm grateful for today. And ideally it'd be, here's who I'm grateful for having done something for me today. And we can, if we can start to see that doing that exercise increases connectedness or increases commitment, that's a lever that you can associate directly with behavior downstream. So that's where I see the connection here.
I like that, Robin. Again, it's a behavior. So what are the behaviors that we need to implement into our daily routine? We do a gratitude exercise. I have 2 accountability partners who have asked, we all every day write down 3 things for which we're grateful. And the catch is you can't ever list something you've listed before. So when you do that, it makes you go through life trying to figure out, okay, I gotta be grateful for something tomorrow, so I need to recognize it today. So I think there are opportunities for us as leaders to say, what are some behaviors that I can implement on my team? And some will work and some won't. And I think it's okay to try them, then ask your team, how did that work for you? But I think that we're gonna have to shift our behaviors as leaders. And if any of us think, I know how to do this, even though I've never done it, I'm gonna do it the same way I've always done it. It would be hard pressed to imagine that would be successful in this new context.
Well, I think, we all have what I call huddles with our staff leaders have what I call huddles. And it's still a meeting. It still has an agenda of sorts. It's just that the questions are different. We start out with, tell me 3 things you're grateful for. One of the things that Jim Urban said that I thought was awesome was he would speak to one person a day, a different person every day, and he would ask that person, how are you doing? What's happening? How can I help you? And then he would ask, what have you done to demonstrate our core values? I thought that was an awesome question. He wasn't just asking, how are you living our core values? He was asking, what are you doing to share it with our staff, with our clients, with your, the people that you manage? And I thought that was an awesome question because values are core to everything. So it's just different questions on the agenda.
Yeah, and that it's interesting, Cynthia, when I was helped Urban Associates create their values and behaviors, I was part of that process. And we believe in our world that behaviors, so you have a value of integrity, which means something different to everyone in the room. But if you have behaviors that describe what integrity looks like in your context, then people really see a pathway for that. So I think as we all are in this new context, I think if we look at our organizational values and hopefully we have some associated behaviors, it might be time to look at them and say, okay, the behaviors are going to shift a little bit because we're in a different context, we're in a different environment. So we might need to rethink what do those behaviors look like on a daily basis and start to implement some new things, same values, but they might be applied a little bit differently to create new normal success.
I'd be curious for you both, Cynthia and Delise, sorry to take your moderator role. Well, one of the things that we have seen very clearly is those organizations that have taken the time to define and clarify their purpose and values and have those conversations now around, okay, how are we using that purpose and those values to conduct ourselves in this time? I see them getting through this to the other side more quickly and more stably, or with more stability.
Yes, I mean, that's what I'm saying as well. It's the core values are exactly that, core values. And so they drive everything else. And I'm just going to go back to what I said earlier. And when I listened to the interview with Delise and Jim Urban, he was a perfect demonstration of that. He knew what they were. He asked how they were being demonstrated because they're being demonstrated differently in some respects. And he reinforced that core value belief and that camaraderie and that playing field for all of his folks, even though they're not physically together anymore and facing untold challenges.
And earlier in my career, I had the opportunity to work for Herb Kelleher, who was the CEO, chairman, and president of Southwest Airlines at the time when they were one of the top 10 places to work for in the country. So I had a really great opportunity to have Herb Kelleher as a mentor. And we went through some perilous times as an organization, not nearly what they're going through now. But he would always say it's how leaders behave in the worst of times that define organizations. And so us really leading with those core values, with those behaviors, and not abandoning them at this moment. This is when we need those behaviors. This is when we need those values to really pull us through as leaders and as an organization, as a country, if you will allow that. And I think that's a stronghold that people can hang on to, and it creates a behavioral path for them to say, how do I do this? Please help me see what the behaviors are that are going to make me successful in this. And I think if we can outline that for them, then they'll rise to the occasion.
Absolutely.
The one thing that I keep
the flip side of that being
that you guys
flip side of that being that if you've got purpose and values, and if the leader is not walking that talk, the detriment, the adverse impact of that is actually hugely expanded. I mean, if you're not walking your own talk, not only do people say, you know what, it doesn't mean anything because this guy doesn't have to do it, it actually will have an amplifying effect. That's the word I was looking for, an amplifying effect of bad behavior, because people are going to be angry about it.
Exactly.
Go ahead. In keeping with that, we've heard a lot of people say this experience, however tragic it is for us, it's actually going to help me rewrite my culture. Like, I haven't liked it, so this is an opportunity for me to really do something different and create some better behavior, some better leadership. So I'm heartened by that, and I hope that leaders will take the opportunity to say, if you didn't like the way it was, the slate might be cleared for you. So take the opportunity to do that.
Yeah.
So I totally agree with what Delise said. I totally agree with what Rob said. I want to go back to the types of questions that Rob outlined. Tell me how you're feeling. Tell me what's going on. What are you concerned with? And then your opportunity to share, what can I do for you? And this is what I need. That conversation goes right down the drain if there was any inkling of not being sincere with those questions and the concern for the person that you're speaking to. It blows up big time. And then, to Rob's point, you're not going to recapture it and say, sorry. And to Delisa's point, if you think you're going to lead a new culture, or change or modify or begin again, you're not going to be able to do it because the trust isn't there. In their mind, and they have big meters that can see that just like all of us do, if they didn't hear something that they felt was true, and if the leader didn't ask, what can I do for you? And there was no follow-up to that, even if it's to say, I can't do it now. If there was no follow-up, there's a dismissal of it, there's a walkover from it. And then what happens? You've lost credibility. You've lost that chance. And it's a much steeper mountain to climb at that point to try to get it back. This is an opportunity to ask those types of difficult questions, or questions that maybe you're not used to asking. Maybe leaders aren't used to leading with those or including those types of questions in an agenda. But to not do so now is missing a huge opportunity for the employee, for the team, and for the entire organization.
No, I think that's really onto something. And what I was going to ask, it's actually a perfect prelude to the question I was having, is the whole theme that I keep hearing is the open-ended question. Like, if you look at how all of you are framing the questions that leaders are asking. So I guess I would come back with is, how has the type of question or the type of way leaders interacting, is it changing to be, or should it be, or should have always been, but we kind of got away from it because things were so normalized compared to they are now. But should it be a lead with an open-ended question? How are you feeling? How can I help you? How can, it seems to be much more open-ended, that creates a dialogue and then the opportunity to provide feedback, which then I think rebuilds that connection, or at least that's what I'm hearing. And that, I think, is what is the essence of how you're going to build change or reset the slate of your culture.
Yes, and I will speak to that for just a minute. I saw a post the other day, and it was like 3 or 4 sentences of somebody who was having a virtual meeting. And this woman was a consultant for a certain group of people. And this is, you need to make sure that you have mandatory rules. You need to make sure that everyone understands that they must attend 2 staff meetings a week, one on Monday, one on Friday. And it went on like that. And I kept sitting in the shoes of the person receiving that message. And I just got like hairy. I got like jumpy, like, no, this is not the way to approach people who are already in a state of uncomfortableness are already in a state of being anxious and concerned and overwhelmed and frenetic. It's not do this, do this, do this. It's let's begin with how'd the day go yesterday, or the types of things that we're talking about. It's just with me.
And Cynthia, I think what we have to really tap into with our employees and our leaders is there is a profound loss of control that people are feeling right now. So in that profound loss of control, I'm not at my best. I'm not going to be as productive as I could be. Myriad things happen. So one of the ways to help give them a piece of that control, or at least a sense of it, is to ask the open-ended questions to say, what do you mean? So that way they own some of it. They feel like they can put their hands around something and at least control a little bit. If not, working from home, and I've worked from home for the better part of my career, and when I get to those situations where I feel like I don't have control, a lot of times I'll go do something I can control, like mow the yard, which isn't really helpful for my work. But there are times when you just have to switch gears to something where you feel like, okay, at least I could control that context or that environment. And if our leaders allow people to create a sense of control, I think that helps. I think it'll get them to productivity faster.
Oh my goodness, yes. And we as leaders, sometimes we forget the fact that the experiences that we create are the things that are going to drive what people feel, and it's going to be how they feel that drives their behaviors, which is going to drive their activities and the outcomes we're going to get. And we too often go back and want to be very prescriptive about the activities, and we've done nothing to change the employee's experience or what they're feeling before they actually go and undertake that activity. And one of the things that we communicate a lot, going to what you just talked about as far as giving them that sense of control, is let's get out of this mindset where we have to tell them exactly what they've got to do. You've got to attend 2 staff meetings a week. You got to start working and log onto your computer by 8 a.m. or whatever that is. Coming from the military, we called it commander's intent, but now we call it leader's intent. But it is such a simple yet profound communication tool that leaders have to say, here's what we need to accomplish. Here's why it's important relative to our purpose and our core values. And here is a detailed description of what it looks like when done successfully. And then get out of the way and not get involved in the business of telling them how to do it. Here's what you need to do. Here's why it's important relative to who we are. And this is what it's going to look like when you're successful.
Perfect. Good point.
Yeah, I had a leader call the beginning of this, was about a week and a half ago, and say, so I'm in my team, we're all in the same space all day, every day. So we work right next to one another. So now that they need to go home because they were not deemed essential, may I ask for everyone to turn their computer on at 8 a.m. and they need to stay visible in front of the computer the entire day. So not if you want this to be successful. No, you can't do that. So, but that, without other information, I might think I can take the context of what it looked like at work and superimpose it on this home environment, and it just doesn't work that way. So we do have to rethink it. And then in that context of home, what that leader was not thinking about is some of those people have children. They're going to be sharing a computer, sharing the same table space. So sometimes I know Will and I work together, and sometimes we work at 11 o'clock at night remotely because we didn't get what we needed to get done during the day. And so your hours of operation become dramatically different from what they used to be.
So as we kind of get to a wrapping up here, the one thing that we're starting to do, and as we look at these polling questions and we look at kind of the feelings, the one thing that I was kind of wondering and looking at is, what's your perception of asking the open-ended questions to your workforce and the implication it'll have on some of these big, trend lines that we're seeing, like anxious, scared, overwhelmed, frustrated being the high marks. How do you see the shift? Do you see the open-ended questions helping address those? And if you do, what are the other norms we're going to start to see grow? So in other words, kind of, we've talked about we need to do it, but what's the benefit or the outcome that you see taking place in the workforce by doing it?
Well, I think it's a huge question, Will, because if we ask them how they're feeling and we don't address it, it's going to amplify those disconnected feelings. So if I ask you how you're feeling and you tell me you're feeling anxious and I do nothing to help mitigate that anxiety, there's a good chance you're going to become more anxious. So we do need to, it's not just asking the question, but it's how we answer the question and what we do. And that a leader, I encourage leaders to, if they're going to make a change, make a behavioral shift, drive it back to last week you told me you were anxious. As a result of that, let's try this. So drive it back to the employee telling us they're anxious, and this is what we're going to implement to try to mitigate that. And if it doesn't work, then let's try something different. Give me your ideas, give me your suggestions. But I would drive it always back to, we're doing this because of the way that you're feeling, so that they feel heard and validated.
I think we are entering the age of iteration. We have got to learn and fail fast and keep iterating so that we can drive what the new normal looks like, rather than events just sweep over us. And I think that Cynthia made a really important point earlier. The authenticity of the question and the sincerity of the tone is going to drive whether or not you're going to get an honest answer or not. You know, how are you feeling? Oh, fine. I don't think you care anyway, so yeah, I'm fine. But if there's genuine, I always just tell people, especially people that are not used to being touchy-feely, just try to be genuinely curious. You know, you don't have to master empathy right away. Try to just master being genuinely curious, so that there is that sense of sincerity.
That's just awesome. Genuinely curious gets individuals and professionals and leaders very, very far, to be genuinely curious, because it exhibits a care for a person as long as you listen to what you're genuinely curious about. You know, leaders go into it thinking they have all the answers. They don't have all the answers, and they certainly don't have them now. And to be able to share that with someone by being openly curious about what is it that's happening with you, and what does it look like? How, if it has changed since last week, then let's work on it together to see what we can do. Let's try this. Some kind of dialogue like that, I think.
Well, and particularly when you've got so many leaders that are not comfortable having those, you know, working with first responders, empathy. Oh, that's just not my style. But since it's such a requisite to get where we want to go and create the new culture, create the new normal, what I love about the data analytics is that as I practice and I stumble and I fall down in practicing that curiosity or that empathy, as I practice over and over again, whether it's like my golf swing or taking on any new skill, as I get through the awkwardness of it, I can go back to the analytics and say, oh my goodness, the connectedness score is actually going up, and the anxiousness score is going down. The level of trust is changing as I continue to practice this, and I can look at the dashboard and I can see actual impact, and it's measurable for me.
Yeah.
Well, that's a perfect segue into what we're going to be discussing next week, because I think what we're learning and what we're going to try to tackle next week is to get the perspective of the workforce, not just a perception of what leaders have, and to start to look at when we start asking the questions. And I think, and again, we come up with these polls at the end of every week, but I think the questions that are going to be important to ask for next week is, how do you feel, but then also, what do you need? Because I think just like we fail with what do you feel, there's going to be very broad similarity or a high level of correlation across all different types of organizations. And if you start to bring back what do you need, then to Rob's point, we can start to do the correlation and say, okay, here's what you told me you need, you know, and how well, and you can ask the question, how well did I fulfill what you needed last week? And that can just be a simple rating of 1 to 5, but that starts to get the trend line. So I think if we start to look at the analytics and kind of how to unearth the new normal, I think asking, how do you feel? And then what do you need? And then getting to the next question, which is a subsequent question the following week, is, well, how well am I fulfilling what you need? And I think if you just look at those 3 questions to the point of iteration, I think we can we can get that pulse and start to move that anxiety level back. Or if we realize anxiety is ramping up, we at least can go, well, it is, but we didn't address what they told us we needed something, but we didn't do it. So I think that'll be really interesting to try to get at. And I think that if you guys are in agreement, I think that kind of looks like the direction of what we should try to go after next week, and see what those data points start to look like on the weekly roundup for the next Friday.
And as a leader, don't be afraid to ask the question, because you might not have the answer to whatever it is that they say they need. If you don't have the answer to what Cynthia said earlier around authenticity, you know what? I don't know. Like you, I don't know yet. Love Carol Dweck's work around growth mindset. You know, I don't have the answer yet, but let's explore it together.
Yeah, I like that, Robin. And unearthing problems too. Don't be afraid to ask, what are the problems that you're facing? I think a lot of times we think we don't want to know what the problems are. I want to know what the problems are fast, so that we can work through them. So asking how you're feeling and asking what are the problems that you need me to help solve with you, I think helps people feel a little bit of a sense of control and connectedness.
And then we can move the connecting and versus distancing index to look differently.
We'll see how that evolves. Well, we're wrapping up here at the end. Please join us next week when we're going to continue this discussion, and we're going to continue to look at live metrics, and we're going to try to start to bring in the feeling versus the needing versus how well am I delivering on what I promised? How well am I fulfilling my goal as a leader? All righty. Well, we're at the top of the hour, so we'd like to try to keep this to the timeline that we promised. So appreciate everybody joining. Hopefully you found the information valuable and useful. We'll go ahead and render this down and make it available for everybody to share. And we hope you come back next week and see what the numbers are telling us, and see what we're learning.
Thank you, Will. Thanks, Rob.
Thanks, Will.
Bye.
Great seeing you, Cynthia and Delise.
Nice seeing you guys.
Stay safe, y'all.